This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, a leading international professional body advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. In this special episode of the Association for Coaching podcast, ahead of a series that Maxine Bell will be hosting on exploring mental health in coaching, we explore some of the topics and insights that we've gained as both coaches and as hosts over the last year in 2023 on the AC's podcast channel. Hello, I'm Rob Lawrence, your host and also the podcast producer for the Association for Coaching. And hiding in the background is Maxine Bell, who in many respects has been the mastermind behind the variety of content and the series that we've had on the AC podcast channel this year. Today, I'm joined by 5 fellow coaches, Simone, Mark, Claudia, Julie and Felicity. And we're going to not only be reflecting on the wonderful content and guests that we've had on the podcast this year, but also their podcasting and hosting experience as coaches. So with no further ado, I would love to introduce to you those that I have with me today. And I'll begin with Felicity, whose series is currently being broadcast at the moment. So she's our latest addition to the podcast series. Felicity, would you like to share with our listener a little bit about who you are and the series that you've been putting together with the AC?
Thank you, Rob. Yes, I'm Felicity Dwyer. I'm a facilitator, coach and trainer. And this is my first podcast series, or my first podcast hosting. The series is called Coaching the Whole Person. And the idea for the series was initially something around integration. And not so much the coach integrating different methodologies, but about way a coach can help their clients to integrate different aspects of themselves. And as we recorded the first 3 or 4 episodes, this idea of coaching the whole person emerged as a title, which seemed to pull together the various ideas, approaches that we cover in the series.
That's lovely. Thanks, Felicity. Simone, how about you?
Thanks, Rob. It's a pleasure to be back again. So my name is Simone Sweeney. I'm an executive and leadership coach, and I'm the host of the series Getting Started as a Coach, which was a series intended to help new or aspiring coaches learn as much practical information to help them understand the industry and, peek behind the curtain and get as much insight as possible. So very happy to have produced those 8 episodes over the last few months.
Great to have you back too, Simone. And Mark, how about you?
Yeah, hi. Yes, my name is Mark Crossfield. I'm a career coach, and shock. My episode of my series was on career coaching. So I wanted to create a series that offers a comprehensive resource and lots of practical tips for people starting out in career coaching, and also for those seasoned career coaches as well. So I wanted to create a podcast that I would have wanted to listen to at every stage of my development as a career coach. And I think I've done that. So, I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Mark. And Claudia, it's not the first time you've been on the podcast, is it? So how about you?
Yes. So this was my second year recording. And this year I chose coaching tools and approaches. And I absolutely loved it. I went to Henley as a student, and so they taught us a lot of approaches and how to use them in our practice. And so I wanted a bit of a refresher, and also that there are so many out there, and to provide the knowledge of all these approaches that are available to us.
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. It's a good reflection and it's a good reminder, isn't it, when we pull these podcast series together of what we know, what we don't know, and perhaps some of the things that are worth reconnecting with. So, Julie, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and the series that you hosted this year?
Thank you. I'm Julie Scanlon, and I'm an executive coach, a facilitator, and also a consultant in diversity and inclusion. The series that I hosted this year was called Coaching Women, which explored in both very broad terms and in detailed terms many kinds of things that coaches may wish to reflect on when we're coaching women. So we explored particular challenges that women face in workplaces, as well as our own positions as coaches as well. And we took an intersectional approach, meaning that we did consider diversity within that very large umbrella term women as well.
Yeah, and I think what's so exciting about the content that we've been putting out this year is there's a real breadth here in terms of, it just reminds me how much coaching is evolving and how much it has evolved so far. And what I love about the content that I've been listening to is we're coming in from all different levels. There's a real depth to coaching, which I think perhaps speaks to your series, Claudia and Felicity. And Mark, you're demonstrating actually where you can niche into a specific area of coaching. And Simone, your series about getting started as a coach, it has been a brilliant opportunity for those that might be interested in coaching, perhaps for the first time. And one of the things I've certainly gained as an experienced coach listening to your series is actually there's a tremendous amount of value in your series for those that have been coaching for a number of years. And again, I think there's a lot in your series which reflects how much coaching has changed over the years. So I'd love to speak to each of you about your own experience producing a podcast as a coach and having that broadcast through the AC. But before we get into that, I would love to talk to you a little bit more about the actual content itself. And perhaps I can start with you, Mark. I'm curious, your series went out earlier this year. It's definitely had an impact on people. I mean, that's been quite evident, I think, on LinkedIn and in other conversations that I've been witnessing and having as well with other people. But I'm curious to know from your own point of view and your own experience, have you experienced any of the ripple effect that's perhaps been taking place since you made that series? And also perhaps if you could talk a little bit about the experience of putting that series together for you as a coach and perhaps how that's maybe opened your eyes up to new aspects of coaching.
Yeah, sure. I have certainly been approached by people that have listened to it. That's evident from the emails and messages that I've received, and I do help people to get started with career coaching. So I often do point people towards the series. Actually, it's quite useful from that point of view. But people sometimes listen to the series and then contact me and want to have a conversation as well. So it works both ways, actually. So so it's been very useful. I am a podcaster already. I have my own podcast, Your Bravo Career, which is about career coaching. So I'm experienced in podcasting, and I've done a dozen or so podcast guest appearances in addition to the 80 plus episodes that I've published. So I was quite familiar with the overall process, but I was very keen to have control over the content. And so you were very obliging in letting me sort of design what the content would look like. And I was really pleased that I could do that, because there was lots of things I wanted to talk about that weren't really being discussed in podcasts I've listened to. Things like, what is career coaching anyway? The role of assessment tools, ethical considerations, strategies of working with clients from diverse backgrounds. I had not really heard anyone talking about those subjects in relation to career coaching specifically. So I was very keen to dive into those. And the ripple effect has been real. The feedback on all those subjects has been excellent, actually.
Yeah, you remind me there, Mark. I used to talk about podcasts as being the start of a conversation, but I think these days they're part of a conversation for us as coaches. And I think it's a really rich experience being able to sort of weave in this sort of asynchronous content into our everyday synchronous conversations with people, and being able to sort of leverage those conversations and those resources. Because as your series has demonstrated, you've invited a number of experts in the career coaching field, and to hear their wisdom that's been gleaned over quite a number of perhaps decades when you combine them in the field of career coaching, it's really interesting to sort of hear some of the themes and thoughts that emerge from those conversations that you've had. So with that in mind, Simone, similarly, how's the experience been for you? I mean, your series was aired not that long ago, not as long ago as Mark's. You've certainly created a bit of a ripple effect from what I've seen. So what's been your experience of that?
It's been fantastic to see how the series has touched people. The overall theme is one of kind of coaching curiosity and exploring the different kind of facets of coaching, but the tools, the organizations, even what the terminology means, things behind. We kind of looked at the various coaching organizations. We looked at what it means to be accredited, what supervision is, and then we got into the kind of practicalities of becoming a coach, including a brilliant episode where Mark was the guest talking about getting started in a coaching business. And I think it was the breadth of the topics that we covered that has made the series appealing to those who are either fairly new on their coaching journey or are thinking about it, either, in training or doing some coaching or mentoring, in a, different career capacity. And it's something maybe for the future. And, it's been really rewarding to see how people have engaged and kind of dipped in on the topics that they, felt would be of benefit to them, but also reflected on those areas that I think are more generic to any coach. Things like how you can continue to learn and grow, where you can get inspiration for the tools and techniques that you may be deploying. Brilliant episode with Michelle Lucas on that, and Tracy Sinclair talking about the learning and growth was a particular highlight. So we covered so much ground, and it's been great to see how that's resonated with different people, whether they're the newer coaches that we were targeting with the series, through to those who have been coaching literally for decades and who are looking for new ideas. And it's been a great kind of synthesis and more full introduction to me as a newer coach myself, in terms of the incredible breadth of opportunity in coaching and how creative you can be, and that there are no hard and fast rules. So just going through the process of finding the guests, connecting, and having these wonderful conversations has really just illuminated that this is an industry and a profession where there is every opportunity, and the sky's the limit to explore. So it's been incredibly rewarding, and it's lovely to see that playing back to the people who have been enjoying it as they listen to the AC podcasts.
Yeah, I definitely get a sense of what you're saying there. In my mind, I've got this image of like a spider's web, or like a big fishing net that sort of kind of spans the globe. And as we're having these conversations through the podcast, that net's not only getting tighter, but it's got more and more points on it and more connections on there. And that's definitely something I've felt through all of your series so far. And it reminded me also of the series that Maxine did last year on creativity and coaching, and actually how once we've created these podcast series, all of a sudden there's a new community that starts to emerge around the topic. And I think that's been true for all of you. And I'm thinking actually of your panel chat there, Felicity, and also appreciate it's very early days when we're recording today's conversation in terms of the ripple effect side of things. But you certainly had quite a good engagement on LinkedIn Live yesterday talking about your series. And I'm sure that's there for anyone listening to this conversation today to go back and replay if they're interested. But one of the things that stood out for me, I was lucky enough to be sat in on the panel chat that you had, Felicity, for your podcast series. And I got a real sense of connection and sort of community in that conversation amongst a number of coaches which perhaps didn't know each other until you brought them together as part of your series. So how's that experience been for you, Felicity?
Oh, I loved the panel chat. I think that was one of my favourite episodes to record, just because, as you were saying, bringing people together, constrained by having to only choose three guests. We did have a fourth guest who sadly couldn't make it in the end. However, I chose guests who I felt would bring different perspectives to the conversation. And I had a few questions for them. And when I was thinking, who am I going to approach first with each question, I immediately knew who I was going to approach first. So I felt that was an indication that, we'd got these different perspectives in the room. And I just pick up on something Simone said about those wonderful conversations. I think the process of hosting the podcast, of having these beautiful conversations with real experts in their field, and the way the AC, as Mark was saying, you provide a lot of support and guidance. And I'm a first-time host, so I needed that. However, I felt I had complete creative control over my series and the guests I chose and the idea and the theme. So I was able to bring all that to the series, but get support with the more technical side and learn from you. So it's a wonderful experience, and I should be excited to see what comes out when it goes out in the world and listeners start to hopefully gain value from it.
Yeah, I'm sure that's something Claudia can relate to. I think it's a wonderful thing. She's just had a tech conference, which we can perhaps talk about briefly, which is something that has emerged off the back of a podcast series that Claudia did early last year in 2022. So I definitely feel that we're sowing seeds when we're putting out this podcast content, that's for sure. So it's been lovely to hear your experience. So Claudia, how about you? You're the only one in the conversation today who's had 2 series out with the AC so far. So how has this experience been perhaps different from the first one for you? And also, in terms of that ripple effect, what has come off the back of this year's series for you, Claudia?
So now that Felicity was talking and mentioning Simone as well, of those conversations that you have in that space. And the second I joined the room today to record this episode, it's that feeling that I got again of that safe place where there is a conversation about a specific topic and that it's so focused on that and nothing else. And I think more than what was different, it was more that was the same, and that feeling that it's difficult to describe. And now where I'm describing, I'm sort of thinking, how do you describe it to someone who hasn't had it? But it's a bit of that safety and even though it's going to the world, so it's not that safe. There is that feeling of safety and of being in this room with these people talking about this topic where we all care about the topic. And so it's something precious to hold as well. So I think that would be the similar thing. In terms of difference, the first one was about technology, and it was more about trying to understand everything that is happening in technology in the world of coaching. And I think at some point we've reached that point where we are, okay, technology is everywhere. So how do we now include technology in most of our conversations? And so the thinking was, I'm not doing another podcast about technology because there's a lot to talk about technology, but more how to include it. And so we tried to include it at the end of the sessions, of each episode. How does the technology impact this approach, this specific approach? I would say that was the most challenging thing because it's still not very well practiced or known. With the Tech Fest, I think it was something similar where we were trying to bring the topic of technology, but without making it entirely about technology. So as well, we spoke about different research that has been done in the coaching community in the past years, and then how is this impacted by technology? And so I would say that's the difference. It wasn't just about technology, but it was more, how do we bring other topics and then include technology within that?
Yeah, you've got me thinking there. I mean, it's really interesting how we can look at the external side of coaching and how coaching fits into the world and how we're fitting the world into coaching, I suppose, from a technical point of view there. But there's also this other element of how do we coach and actually our own, the actual coaching itself. And I think that all of the series and the content that we've produced this year in some way, in some sort of shape or form, speaks to one or both of those aspects. So how about you, Julie? What's been the experience for you since putting the series together? Have you noticed any of the ripple effects, any conversations that have come off the back of your series since putting it together?
I've had quite a lot of positive comments, mostly through LinkedIn, which is where I hang out probably way too much. But people have told me how thought-provoking it's found and also how helpful they've found it in relation to their coaching practice as well. So those ripples, I feel, are just continuing, and it's lovely to have that, have the podcast sitting there, and I'm getting people. Only last week I had something else come in response to it. So it's been fantastic just to be engaging in those conversations and getting that lovely feedback.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Julie. It's lovely to hear that you've been able to carry those conversations forward, and it's very insightful too, just hearing about your experiences with putting the series together there too. I'm curious now to just change gears a little bit. Putting a podcast series can be challenging. I mean, there's the technical side of it, which I'm sure we've all got experience of from that side of things. And of course, we're using technology today to record and broadcast our conversation. But there's also this sort of human side to this as well. And some of the challenges that we face, actually just showing up as a coach, leading a conversation around this topic. So I'm kind of curious, and perhaps I'll start with you, Claudia, in terms of actually that experience of perhaps finding the courage to have these conversations, or actually to make that investment, because obviously you've invested a lot of time preparing, researching, selecting guests, and then thinking about each of those guests and what you're going to ask them. So I'm kind of curious for you, Claudia, what were some of the challenges putting the series together for you this year from a podcasting point of view and from a personal point of view?
The biggest challenge is that there are very broad topics. And so it's about how to make it relevant in a short space of an hour or a series of 10 episodes, because there's so much you can cover and you can almost have a full series on each of them. So if I think about positive psychology, we could have a whole year talking about positive psychology, and similar with all the other approaches, neuroscience and so it was the biggest challenge was, how do we provide enough information of value in an hour to get people understanding or reminding them of these approaches, and then if they're interested, then going and finding out more. And I guess that's the biggest thing. It's, in our case, it's more of a series where it was about almost like a teaser, of this is the approach, these are all the approaches that you can use. And for me, for example, I've seen them in university while I was studying, but I still had forgotten a lot of them. And even though I had applied some of them in my practice and seen how effective they can be, like MI, motivational interview, where I had seen clearly how it helped someone who clearly had a certain type of thing they wanted to change, but it was for external reasons. They didn't see the problem themselves as them having it. And then through the session, they did get to see how that they were having that problem and how they wanted to change it. And so I had experienced it as a coach, and somehow within my practice, I left it completely behind the approach. And then while we were doing the series, it was a bit of that reminder of this is an approach that is worth looking at and really understanding better and keeping in your practice, because that's the thing, you have to keep learning about them and practicing them and all of that to be able to really master them in a session. And so I think even for me, that was the case where I wanted, it's only a teaser. So it's not that, oh, I heard that episode and that's enough, now I can stop. It's more of, this is everything that is available, and like a catalog, and then which one do I like and which one do I want to focus on, and maybe this year I focus on this one and including this one in my practice, and then next year another one. Because as we saw, it's more, you were talking about integration as well, Felicity, but it's more of an integration of how can you integrate more than one into your practice, and the value of integrating them. And so that was, I think, the biggest challenge for me.
Yeah, and perhaps sharing some of my own challenge there, I put my hand up to be the guinea pig in a number of Claudia's conversations there to be the coachee. And actually, that was a really, you mentioned motivational interviewing there. That was a really interesting experience for me, getting out of my comfort zone and being at that end of it. But I really actually enjoyed the experience of that. And that got me curious about motivational interviewing and to learn more about it. So you've just reminded me there of actually how in other ways the podcast sort of can inspire you to go off and research and learn about something new as well. Felicity, you're nodding away there as Claudia's chatting. So I'm guessing that your experience has been somewhat similar, has it? What about you?
Yeah, I was just reflecting, listening to Claudia, on a few things and in what you've said. In approaching the series, I think most of the episodes follow a bit of a structure where they explore some of the ideas first, and I believe will be of interest to perhaps beyond practicing coaches, but people who are interested in personal development, and then trying to bring it round to a few practical ideas that people can take away and use in their practice. So trying to ride that horse in an hour of how do you provide something that's valuable and practical and might encourage people to learn more and be that starting point, that taster. And I had the experience, this was one unexpected challenge in one of the early episodes when I was participating in a short demo with the coach. And I'd gone, into my own material, and then suddenly I had to make a transition back to being the interviewer. And I hadn't given that thought ahead of the episode, although having been through it once, I was prepared for it in a couple of future episodes. But that was an unexpected piece of learning for me, that if you are going to play both roles, you do have to give a little thought to the transition back into the interview mode and focusing on the guest again.
Yeah, it was a bit of a production risk on our part, I must admit, doing live coaching. And it's given us some thoughts about the other digital learning content that we could be doing with webinars and whether there's the right fit. So we'd be interested to hear from listeners as to what their experience has been hearing some of these live coaching demos and whether they're useful or whether they're insightful or maybe not. Maybe that's something we should avoid in the future. But I think it's been a useful and an insightful experience for all of us. So Julie, when putting your series together, what were some of the challenges and obstacles that you found in terms of achieving the vision that you had in mind for the podcast series?
Yeah, I think one of the key things was it was both a challenge and an opportunity choosing the topics within this very, very large topic. I had to think about what to cover and what to leave out, though, because we could have had this series could have gone on for a year or 2 years. It could be a series that went on forever. So there was some of that. Initially there was a lot of thinking about the shape of what the series would contain and what it would look like. I think also for me, before I first approached the AC, I also wondered how the idea would be received. So this thing called coaching women or something along those lines, some people might ask, why do we need this focus on women? So I was a little, I wonder what you folks at the AC would feel about that. But you, Rob, and Maxine and others at the AC were very receptive and very encouraging in helping me sort of shape the idea. And in fact, Maxine and I addressed that very question in our LinkedIn Live when we were trailing the series just before it came out as well. So I guess that, whenever you put something out there that is, some people find contentious, a focus on a particular group of people, you always have that little anxiety as to whether it's going to go down okay. And it was brilliant, and it was brilliantly received. So that was perfect.
That's great to hear that it was brilliantly received, Julie. Simone, I'm curious, for you, what have been some of the challenges for you personally and putting the podcast together?
Yes. So it was, I think, a wonderful process. And, the obvious answer will always be the technology and the scheduling. But you and Maxine and team handled that process so well. So for anyone who is thinking about moving into the kind of podcasting sphere, it's a great introduction. So huge thanks for that. Just reflecting as I'm listening to Claudia and Felicity speaking, one of the things that was challenging was that a lot of the topics that we covered in getting started as a coach were opinion-based in a way. We talked about, a lot of very specific, hard and fast things like what is coaching and some of the different models and how you can learn and where you can go to get support, the resources. But then we also explored things like, should you niche? How should you charge? In terms of, your pricing and attracting clients, what's the right marketing vehicle we should take? And it's one of the, all of those are topics I talked about with Mark when he was my guest. But we also explored things like accreditation and supervision. And I think huge value came from how the guests, in their discussions with me, were willing to share their experiences, but in a very balanced way. So even if they felt quite strongly that you should niche, they were able to present the alternative view, or in the panel chats, to kind of debate that. And, I shared my experiences as well. And I think that there is huge value in that, because not only were listeners being introduced to these topics or considerations and decision points that many of them will need to be making at some point, whether you're a new coach or an existing coach, in terms of, for example, where you invest your money in terms of more learning, or whether you should choose to be accredited, for example. So that exploration, I think, was hugely valuable, but it was a challenging thing to manage in the discussions and also in the selection of the guests. So you had a broad experience base, but also that broad experience base still had room for other opinions and perspectives. So it was a wonderful challenge, but one that I think was present in almost every episode.
Yeah, you remind me, so much of it is about what we can't include. And it's sort of, sometimes you're having to pick amongst favourites, which is a really tricky thing to do. But it comes back down to what do we feel is relevant to the listeners today? And we can always, pick up the rest, let's hope, further down the line. So, Mark, how about you? You've got quite a bit of podcasting experience behind you. So I'm kind of curious, either from a sort of a podcasting point of view or from a coaching point of view, what were some of the challenges you perhaps had to face yourself, and how did you overcome those for your series?
Yeah, picking up from what Simone was saying there, identifying guests that are going to add value to the episode and the series is a really vital part of getting the right content. So I spent quite a bit of time researching the right guests, making sure that they're the right fit. And if you recall, there were a couple of occasions where I just couldn't find the right person for a particular episode. And at one point, you gave me the advice that, just stick with it. Just keep looking, you'll find somebody. And I was able to find, if you recall, it was the diversity inclusion expert that I was having difficulty getting someone to do that would fit with what I wanted to talk about. I did actually find somebody. That's another story for maybe later into this episode. But getting those right people is the first challenge, I think. And then secondly, getting the best out of those people, because whilst we're good at asking questions as coaches, the questions we normally ask in a coaching environment are about, deepening the person's self-discovery and goal-orientated questions. Whereas an interview in a podcast is really about you helping them to impart knowledge to the listeners. And that's a different technique, actually. And Simone and I have talked about this before, actually, getting interviewing technique and listening to good interviewers, listening to what they do and what they say when they do jump in, but when they don't jump in, that skill, when to intervene, it's a difficult skill to learn. So I was learning my craft, and this helped me again to practice that, to become better as an interviewer, asking the right questions and marshalling the conversation so that the listener gets the best out of the person that's in front of you. So there are some of the challenges that I had.
A wonderful thoughts there, Mark, and a great point about the type of questioning and how that changes, because it's not a coaching conversation, it's a podcast conversation about somebody's expertise or experience. And that's a different question set, that's a different mindset. I think that comes to that. And actually changing gears, particularly if you've been coaching beforehand in the day and then going into a podcast conversation, as you say, it's about, you have to remind yourself, what is this? Who is this for? What is this about? And how can we get the best out of the opportunity that's available in front of us. You touched upon it just then, Mark. Actually, after that exhaustive research, trying to find the right guest for the particular topic that you had in mind, do you want to share quickly the story and the coincidence, which I think blew our minds for all of us on the team when it was revealed in your episode?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. So I tried to get somebody to do the diversity, inclusion, equity role, but hadn't managed to get somebody. Found Salma Shah online. She'd written a book actually on that subject in relation to coaching. So I thought this would be excellent. Arranged to speak to her. In the meantime, downloaded her book to read and started reading her book. And the more I read it, the more I realised we had a lot in common, because it turns out she was from the north of England. And then when I read a bit further on, she was actually from Bolton, my hometown, actually. So I thought that's a big coincidence. As I continued to read, it turns out she actually went to the same school as me as well. And she was 1 year above me at school. So we had an awful lot in common. And it became an interesting frame for our conversation about privilege and all the challenges that those moving to the UK from other countries, or whose family, a previous generation, had moved to this country. So we use that as a frame, really, to talk about diversity, inclusion, privilege, equity, all those subjects. It became a reference that even though we had a lot in common, we also had lots of difference, and those differences were a factor in our conversation. And it was a real eye-opener for me, actually. And, it's really worth listening to the episode to listen to the value that Salma brings to the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Mark. I'll probably forever remember it as quite a special moment. The thought that you had to go on that sort of expansive research journey there, and then the dots led all the way back to you going to the same school as the right person for that particular episode, which is just quite amazing. So just sticking with you, Mark, I'm curious. We've talked about some of the challenges, and maybe that was one of them, but I'm curious, what other highlights have you experienced, perhaps during the podcast, the making of your series on career coaching, or perhaps since then? What have been some of the highlights for you that have been sort of podcast related from your coaching experience too?
Yeah. Well, one of the highlights is definitely being able to pick really great people to interview. So, the AC has quite a bit of clout when it comes to finding people. I have my own podcast, as I've mentioned. Sometimes people don't want to come on my podcast. I can't understand why, but, it's not a big podcast like the AC. So some people don't want to come on the podcast. So I found that it was easier to find and attract people to come onto the podcast. So that's great. Obviously, you've got good guests, you're off to a flying start. So I think that was a really good, highlight. But also just having the conversations with these people that are really interesting, that are really into the things that you're into, that are talking at a really high level about, the subject matter. And at times I forgot that I was hosting the episode. I thought, I'm so engaged in this conversation. I felt like a listener at times, and I had to quickly get myself back into interviewer mode so that I didn't blow the interview. So, there was that element of feeling really privileged to have such great conversations that I was able to, be part of and lead and put together. So I think that was excellent. It was great meeting so many interesting people. And since then, I've a lot of people that have reached out to me. I've been invited onto other people's podcasts, like Simone and others. I think that's been really good. People have asked me to do things that, to support work they're doing as well, just on the basis of the involvement with the podcast. I think that's good. So I think there definitely has been a coming together of interest in what I put out there, me in particular, the work I'm doing. And I've had a few people actually that have reached out and said, hey, can you interview me for the AC podcast? And I've been able to say, well, actually, that series is finished. But if you'd like to come onto my podcast, then I would love to have you. And quite a few have said yes. So I've actually got some some really good episodes out of it by getting the right people to interview. So yeah, it's been great. Lots of highlights.
That's lovely. Thanks for sharing that, Mark. Claudia, how about you? What have been some of the highlights, perhaps during your series? Because it was quite a long series that you put together, or perhaps since then.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you, Mark, on the passionate. Having conversations with people who are equally passionate about the topic, which of course makes it, and I myself also found just feeling like a listener rather than the interviewer. So that was great. We got some free coaching, Rob, there, and having these experts suddenly demo in 10 minutes some of their coaching. Which brings me to something you asked earlier, and I guess there is a side you also were Mark mentioning about how you shared from your perspective as well in the diversity and inclusion episode. And I guess in the coaching community, there is this whole safety and this feeling of a community and that it's a safe place. So I guess that makes it easier in terms of putting yourself out there with recording the episodes, but as well doing personal stuff as with the coaching conversations that we had. Going on dog walks with more people than I thought I could. So I've had people stop me and share how while they were dog walking that they were listening to the episodes and accompanying them. And it's been nice to hear how others have found it useful. So it's been, in general, a very positive experience. Mark, nice that you have your own podcast in some way that you can continue that work with your passion. I guess there is that feeling of it's a nice experience always finishing. What I'll say is you end an episode energized, or at least I felt always after my episodes that I very energized. And so it is a positive experience, even if finding the right speakers and all of that can be a bit challenging at times. But in general, after you've recorded, it's a very nice feeling of something good that you're putting out there, that it can be helpful to other people.
That's lovely. Thanks, Claudia. So, Julie, what have been some of the highlights for you from the podcast this year and some of your experience with the podcast?
I think really the generous spirit in which the podcast guests approached the whole thing, the whole conversation, that was a real highlight for me, every single one of my guests. But for example, I recall Robert Laycock's contribution. He almost moved me to tears in the way that he brought his very reflective and very vulnerable approach to this conversation. So it was an enormous highlight for me and a privilege to have those conversations, really. And then also some of the responses that we've had afterwards have been just amazing. So it was only last week that someone who had finished listening to the whole series contacted me on LinkedIn, and she said that she talked about all the neurons firing in her brain and the cells in her body firing up as she listened to this series. And I mean, that's just pretty amazing feedback for something that, I found very pleasurable and enjoyable as well. So the fact that that is out there and kind of having that impact on people is just a real buzz, actually.
That's lovely, Julie. Yeah. And I remember having the opportunity to sit in on the recording with Robert Laycock and myself. I felt very moved by a lot of what he had to say. And I thought it was a very refreshing perspective that he offered in that conversation in your series.
Yeah, it was.
Simone, how about you?
I love how Claudia and Mark are both speaking about the energy that you get from it, because I think that was definitely a highlight for me. I feel that creating this series was an incredible gift, particularly at this point in my kind of coaching journey. Every guest, actually, I had on the Getting Started as a Coach series spoke about the importance of community and how you learn so much and you get so much value and support and inspiration from working with others and kind of keeping a very close and cultivating a close community. And the series production actually helped to create that for me in large part. So it was so valuable to hear the experiences, the insight, and the pitfalls that the people I was interviewing were sharing about their experiences. And that was the other absolute highlight, is that I feel like through this series, I have received so much wisdom and insight that I can take to help me along my way. It's like I have all these guests kind of sitting, on my shoulders saying, don't forget when this comes up, think about doing this. Mark said to me, you need to know when to outsource. So now I have an accountant. Mark, you'd be happy to know, that there are these practical tips that I gain through that conversation. And what then kind of rounds that out is, and this is where the energy kind of connects with the community, is that I know, and at least I certainly hope that the audience who have been listening to the podcast will be benefiting in the same way, so that community that we are able to create and that network and those responses and that guidance and wisdom will flow through and go out to a wider community and help people, help coaches. So that was definitely a highlight for me.
That's smashing, Simone. And I've got many, many highlights, I must admit. But one of those absolutely was your interview with Mark. It was great to sort of hear Mark's series and hear Mark hosting a series, and then actually hear about his experience as a coach, the man behind the voice, if you like, in that episode. And I thought also, Mark, you were very honest in terms of the reality of running your own coaching business and what that's like. So thanks for sharing that, Simone. Felicity, how about you? What have been some of the highlights for you so far?
Well, definitely, as others have said, the conversations and the opportunity. I knew, I think, 3 of the guests before the series. The others were people that I knew of, or in one case researched, because I didn't have someone in mind. So the opportunity to have a one-to-one with people with 30 years expertise in a field that interested me, what a fantastic opportunity, and to share that as well. So it's been the opportunity to meet and have those conversations, which went quite deep at times, and the guests took some of them to places that I hadn't thought about ahead. So it's been, a very rich experience, and I've loved it. Yeah.
That's lovely. Thanks for sharing that, Felicity. So the time's flying, and just before we start to go into the close here, I've got a couple of more questions I'd love to ask you, each of you. I'll stay with you, Felicity, if I may. From your point of view, what's one thing that you've perhaps learnt about yourself, either personally, professionally, or as a coach, or as a podcaster now, through this experience of putting a podcast together?
Ooh. Well, my passion is and has been for many years personal development and ongoing growth, I suppose. So it's given me not only a chance to share the passion, but it's given me, I would say, some ideas on where I might go next and the next phase of my career. And I do some coach education at the moment, mostly for managers, quite a basic level. So, what more can I do to help contribute to the growth of the profession and educate coaches? So that's something professionally and also personally that I've gained.
I love that idea of contribution there, and I very much feel that these podcasts are a contribution to the wider coaching community. So that's lovely to hear. How about you, Mark? What's one thing?
I think if there's one thing for me, it's about finding your own way, becoming a coach or a career coach. There isn't just one way of being a career coach, and you have to find your own way. I mean, that needs to be based on certain principles, of course, but you need to find your own way of being the career coach that you want to be. It's quite easy to want to be like another career coach or another coach that you're aware of or you've listened to, and there's no reason why you can't be influenced by other people. But ultimately, you have to do it your own way. And I think we're all on a bit of a journey when it comes to doing that. But it's important to recognize that is a journey and you're on that journey. But the destination is one that is you coming home to your best self as a career coach or a coach. And when you focus on that, then every day, every week is a learning opportunity. And you can't go wrong.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate that. So, Julie, what have you learned?
I think for me, it really reiterated and consolidated how much I enjoy having conversations about a sort of combination of theory and practice and holding spaces for that reflection and that contemplation with people, engaging in that dialogue around the sort of big ideas, if you like. I think also personal learning, of course, was around the conversations with the guests. They've given me such thought-provoking perspectives at times, which I continue to reflect on and which have had an impact on, some of my coaching in practice as well. So again, I'm just sort of appreciative for those conversations and the getting my sort of neurons firing, I suppose, around that learning process.
How about you, Simone? What's one thing that you've gained?
I think kind of building on what Mark is saying is the kind of understanding and awareness that there is no single path, that being creative, exploring, being open to new ideas, kind of being curious, while being yourself in that kind of the pursuit of what's right for you in coaching and what value you can bring is absolutely, the right path to take. That, you can create so many different things with that kind of openness within the coaching industry and the profession. So I think the podcast process really helps me to feel confident in that. And I think it has really challenged me to explore my boundaries and look towards new horizons as a coach.
Thanks, Simone. And Claudia, how about you?
So in my case, almost the opposite, Mark and Simone, as in when you get started as a coach, one of the biggest challenges is to find your own style and your own way. And I guess what this series brought to me was this awareness that you might get too comfortable in your way. And so to, in some way, always be expanding and challenging yourself and reminding yourself of what else is out there to be able to complement that with your own way. So not the opposite, I guess. It's a complement to what you, Mark and Simone, said, in that you find your own way. But once you find it, to really make sure to look as well outside of what you're doing and remind yourself of maybe things you were doing before, or so that looking outside.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm hearing sort of themes there of expanding our awareness there, and also not getting stuck in our own ways and always challenging ourselves and exploring new paths and opportunities. And the podcast has been an experience to do that and to explore our own territory, but also to find new territory as part of that process. So that's really interesting to hear and wonderful. Thank you for all of you for sharing that. So I've got a couple of questions now as we wrap up today. It's been a really insightful and just a fun and useful conversation to be having. And I'm thinking now with our listener in mind, who may be a future guest on the podcast or even a future host. I think we've got most of the content mapped out for 2024, but who knows? If not in the 2024 reflections, perhaps in the 2025 reflections, the person listening to this right now might be part of this panel. So I'm kind of curious from each of you, perhaps starting with you, Mark, maybe a couple of words of encouragement from your experience for that person listening now who might have a burning idea, might have some experience or some unique experience as a coach, I'm sure. What words of encouragement would you offer them if they've got an idea that they would like to share that could be a podcast?
Yeah, I would say that if they've got some ideas of things they might want to make into a podcast, and they've got a sense of this was something that they would like to talk about, I would say that they've also probably got a feeling that maybe they don't want to do it because they're a little bit scared, or they're unsure about putting themselves out there, or they're not sure about all this podcasting malarkey. And I would say be comfortable with being a little bit uncomfortable about this. And if you feel a little bit uncomfortable about putting yourself out there, that's okay. Actually, if you can actually just sit with that discomfort and just push through it in the right way and give it a go, what you'll find is that new doors will open for you, new opportunities, and you'll develop as a coach, you'll develop personally, and that can lead to places that you just can't imagine in terms of where you are now. So just give it a go.
That's fantastic. And I think just building on that point there, something you said earlier about sort of creating connections and opening doors for you, that's definitely been something I've witnessed and experienced more so this year, I would say, with each of you as we've been putting these series together. How about you, Simone?
So absolutely, I would echo what Mark is saying, is just go and give it a go. There's so much practical support from the initial kind of connection with the AC podcast team through to the content, the guests, the tech support, scheduling, through the great work that Maxine and Rob are doing for it. So you are going to be supported in the process. So if you have a great idea, do feel brave and bring it forward. And it will, what you're experiencing or the idea that you are feeling has a place on a podcast and, needs a voice, is likely something that someone else is thinking about, wondering about. So it's definitely worth just bringing that forward, and you will definitely get incredible inspiration and energy from doing it yourself. So you're solving someone else's need and also kind of motivating and inspiring a new direction for yourself once you are hosting. So I definitely encourage it.
Thanks, Simone. So Julie, how about you? What words of encouragement would you offer our listener if they're thinking about putting their own podcast series together, or maybe even making a contribution to the AC podcast, in terms of perhaps some of the benefits that you feel you've gained having produced and put together a series around coaching with women?
I mean, I would also say definitely give it a go. And I actually said this to a peer recently who contacted me to ask, hey, how was that? I think if you are thinking of pitching to the AC, just in terms of the practical support, great support in terms of tech, great support in terms of the organisation. They do all the coordination of diaries for you, so it takes some of that nightmare out. But in terms also for bouncing ideas around, the AC has been fantastic to kind of support and kind of give that infrastructure. So that really benefited me in terms of I could focus on the conversations and the details of conversations and, kind of plan what I wanted to discuss with my guests. I think, as I've mentioned, in terms of my learning, just being the privilege of being able to have those conversations and be able to really curate something for yourself and invite people that you want to have those great conversations with is a real kind of pleasure. So you will benefit from it if you kind of go down this route. There's a lot to learn and there's a lot to gain from it.
That's great, Julie. And I'm just also further curious, has the podcast series and your experience of putting this podcast series together helped you or supported you in any way in terms about talking about the subject to others?
I think it has opened up some conversations, particularly on LinkedIn, where people might not have been, particularly think that this was a particular kind of topic that might be of interest. So some of those conversations just on LinkedIn have been around illuminating for people, which is fantastic in terms of the work that I do with regard to inclusion generally and more broadly. So I think there has been some opening up and some resonances, and thinking about things in different ways is what, I've kind of gained from the podcast as well, and speaking with the guests.
Yeah, so kind of thought-provoking in that way for some, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely.
And Claudia, as a seasoned podcaster now, what words of encouragement would you offer somebody?
It's funny when you call me a seasoned, because I actually never thought I would be doing podcasts. And I guess in answer to your question, I'll share a bit of my story, which is in the AC, we wanted to try and get people more information about, or the coaching community more information about technology. And so there was that purpose of why doing the podcast. And that's basically what motivated and triggered it all. And so there, Simone, where you were saying that each person has a voice and a unique way of saying things, and the fact that if you feel that there's something that needs to be said, it's probably that there is more people who want to hear about that. And in support, there is an amazing team who will help you along the way and make it almost feel seamless, a seamless ride. So you're almost like getting on a boat and the boat is sailing and you're just on the boat. And then you'll also get coaching yourself, which I enjoyed very much in terms of trying to learn how to do things, or whenever I needed help on anything, I would have you or Maxime there to coach me in some way into how to get over that. And so it's been an incredible journey and easier than I thought.
Thanks for sharing that, Claudia. And Felicity, how about you?
Well, as a first-time host, I would echo the comments about the support from the team, from yourself and Maxine and the marketing team. It's really your hands are held throughout the process. And for those of you thinking about it, I would say if there's a topic that excites you, that you'd like to learn more about, and that you'd like to share with others, then this is a platform to do that. I would really encourage you, echo everything everybody said. It just starts with a conversation, an idea, and see where it takes you.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Felicity. So before my closing question, rather than invite each of you to share where our listener can connect with you, I would invite our listener to go and find your series and have a little listen to a bit more from each of you, which you can find on the Association for Coaching's Digital Learning Hub, which is something new for this year. So go and find the podcasts there. Go and have a listen to the series on your favourite podcast app or on the Digital Learning Hub. And you'll be able to find out more about each of my guests here today. So my final question then, as we wrap up, it's actually 3 questions in one. So I'm going to be a bit sneaky here. I would like to just ask you for your final thoughts from our conversation today. Is there anything you'd like to add in terms of the conversation that we've had today and something that you might feel is useful to our listener? And also with that, perhaps something that you're grateful for or something that's inspired you, perhaps in the context of your podcast series. So perhaps I'll start with you, Felicity, if I may.
I guess my final thought is about podcasts more generally. I think podcasts are just such a fantastic way of learning. They're very accessible. The topics are covered are very broad. On the AC podcast itself, just that one podcast has covered so many, and they can go quite deep. Even in an hour, a one-to-one conversation or a small group conversation can go deep. So listen to more podcasts, but also reflect on the podcast. Do something, try one of the exercises, make some notes in your journal afterwards. Don't just have them as background, listen to them, but just take a few minutes to reflect and take action.
That's lovely. Thanks, Felicity. Claudia, how about you?
So I think I completely, as Felicity was talking, it was almost, I felt like she was talking to me in the sense of, in one of my reflections from my podcast, it was about reading more, and how over the years I keep telling myself that I want to read more. And somehow I hadn't included podcast within that. As I was hearing of all the podcasts that have been created this year, I wanted to hear every episode of them because I'm very curious about them, and somehow one gets busy and doesn't do it. So I think of those who said, oh, well, I was doing the dog walk, I was listening to you. So I guess one of the things I'm taking from this is more how to include podcasts more in my life, because of the huge value they can have for us as a reminder, and as a learning, and as a companion, and a community sense of things that are relevant to us as coaches.
Thanks, Claudia. So, Julie, have you got any final thoughts or ideas you'd like to share just as we wrap up today?
I guess I'd just like to say I'm so pleased that I did the series. I'm very grateful that it will sit there now amongst the AC podcasts and for people to listen to, and hope that it makes a contribution to people's practice and their contemplation. And so it just feels like a real privilege to have had that opportunity to make that intervention.
You mentioned about who we're grateful for or what we're grateful for. I think I'm really grateful for all the connections I've made, all the new friends I've made. I think that's fabulous. It's part of what happens when you do something like this. So I think that is definitely worth remembering. And also echo what Felicity was saying in relation to the taking action and not being a passive listener. So if you're listening to episodes, then do something about that. So take some action. You can't think your way into being the coach you want to be. You've got to take action. The action can be anything, but taking the action is the key thing. So listen to the episodes for sure, get inspiration, get some knowledge, but then turn that into action, because that can really make a difference.
Thanks, Mark. Simone?
So very similar, I think, to what all of my great colleagues here are sharing. I am profoundly grateful to the AC for having this podcast channel and so much rich content. Whenever I discover something that I'm not sure about, or I need a bit of inspiration, it's one of the first places I will turn to. Almost in every case, there will be content that's speaking to that. And it's a great way to just, start to get a sense of something and explore a topic and then kind of find your way through it. So I'm very grateful to kind of the AC, the podcast kind of experience. And I think that's, definitely also the highlight for me is that it is, the Association for Coaching is a community, and the podcast channel is a resource, but it's only one of many that help you learn more, find people who are like-minded, topics of interest and engagement and inspiration. So, the podcast is that kind of very present manifestation within this context, but it is being an incredible resource for me as I go through my coaching journey. And I think that is true for anyone, no matter what stage they're at, because the content is so rich that there really is something for everyone. And if it's not, actual hard knowledge you're looking to learn, it's definitely a source of inspiration.
And a lovely place to leave our conversation today, Simone. Very inspirational, thank you. And I'll add my own gratitude to Miranda and Maxine very much behind the scenes here today, and all the way through the podcast, supporting me and all of you to enjoy this wonderful content and all the connections and collaboration that we get to enjoy through the AC. So thank you all, Mark, Felicity, Julie and Claudia and Simone, for your time today and a lovely conversation. Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at theassociationforcoaching.com. Explore our new digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs and member benefits, interviews, podcasts and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership tools, models and the latest industry trends to help you develop and increase your coaching expertise.